GET is global. GET is Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium. It's one of the biggest biosecurity and One Health focused organization on the continent of Africa. GET was set up about 11 years ago at the peak of the Ebola crisis that ravaged countries in West Africa, and it was clear during Ebola that West African countries lacked the capacity to cope with such level of health threats and biosecurity threats. So there was a need to set up organizations, especially in Africa, that will continue to build capacity of both governments and non-governmental organizations to cope with emerging health challenges on the continent. My organization, Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium, GETS, was one of the organizations that were set up in 2014. And in the last 11, 12 years thereabout, we've been working with both governments and non-governmental organizations to build capacity to cope with emerging health threats and environmental threats in Africa. And one of the platforms that we've used in recent years, in the last 3-4 years, is a monthly webinar series, a platform that we've used to discuss emerging issues in the area of One Health and biosecurity and how it affects the continent of Africa. This year, 2025, we've organized 12 editions of the GET monthly webinar series focusing on important topics and issues in the area of One Health, climate change, biosecurity, biosafety, and other relevant important issues and their impacts on the continent of Africa. Today, we'll be focusing on another very, very important topic, that is the impact of climate change on health. You agree with me that climate change is one of the, if not the greatest threats to health in our world today. Every aspect of health is affected directly or indirectly by climate change, whether mental health, emerging infectious diseases, food malnutrition, and other areas of health is directly or indirectly affected by climate change. And to effectively address this impact of impact of climate change on health, we'll need to discuss policy, because policies determine the direction of strategies and what governments will be doing. And policies start from the international level to regional level to national level, and it impacts directly people at the local level that feels the impact of climate change most, especially in Africa, that depends directly or indirectly on nature for a lot of stuff that we do. So today we are going to be focused on international policies and how it affects human health, international climate change policies, and how it affects human health. And the biggest policy platform for climate change, like we know, is a conference of parties that takes place every year in different parts of the world. The last one we had was last month, I guess, yes, last month in Brazil, where experts and policymakers from all over the world gathered to discuss impact of climate change and how those impacts can be addressed. Today, we have subject matter experts, we have a moderator and subject matter experts that played significant roles at the Conference of Parties this year in Brazil to discuss issues around climate change and health. And we've brought them on this platform to discuss how we can address the issue of impact of climate change on health, especially as it focuses on Africa and how Africa and countries on the continent can adapt and mitigate the impact of climate change on health, especially at the local level. So we have subject matter experts that will be speaking with us today. We have our moderator, Mr. Boyega, and 4 subject matter experts that will be speaking to us today on climate change, on how we can adapt and reduce the impact of climate change on health globally and focusing on the continent of Africa. Before I hand over to our moderator today, I want to especially thank our participants, those that have been with us since January, attending this webinar series. Like I always say, you are the reason why we do this every month. Thank you very much for being part of this webinar since January. We are very grateful. And to all our speakers today and speakers that have spoken in past events this year, we sincerely appreciate your time and your expertise that you're sharing with us. Thank you very much. Without wasting much time, I hand over to the moderator of today's webinar, Mr. Agboyega Olonfemi. Mr. Agboyega, thank you very much for accepting to moderate this webinar today. You have the platform, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Bobade, for this very honor to moderate this the December series of the GET webinar. Indeed, a honor, maybe on a lighter note, that December is my birth month, and also for my wife, and also our wedding anniversary, which is today. So, and I feel delighted that this is happening, having also participated at the COP30 in the city of Belém, in the state of Para. So, welcome once again, everyone, to this December series of the GET webinar. Today, we will be taking a very great look into what happened at COP30, and more importantly, the highlight of the Brazilian-led Belém Health Action Plan, which is the first international climate adaptation framework that is dedicated specifically to health. Like it has already been established, we will not take much of your time, and we will dive straight into what we want to do today. Let me also reemphasize the objective of today's webinar is to explore how climate change is exacerbating health risks like heat stress, diseases, and air pollution, and also to review the outcomes of COP30 with a focus on the Berlin Health Action Plan and its impact on climate health strategies globally, and also examine the One Health approach and its role in integrating human, animal, and environmental health for climate adaptation. At the same time, identify the barriers to and opportunities for building climate resilient health system. And more importantly, to promote collaborations between health, climate, and policy experts to strengthen health system in response to climate change. By COP31, Oro leads to Antalya in Turkey, and then it comes back to Africa. And I think I am impressed that this is actually happening, and thanks to GET for bringing us together. I see a number of us from the Philippines, from India, from Gombe, and all. Please, we would like to have you introduce yourself using the chat box, and when our guest speakers are speaking, please also use the Q&A box and keep the questions coming. With the assemblage of subject experts that we have today, this webinar promises to be very, very insightful and also keeping you abreast with what happened, more importantly, at COP. Faith, I don't know if you have those profiles to share, but I would like that we get ready, and let me welcome you specifically to this session. My name is once again Boyega Olorunfemi. I'm the project lead and senior policy analyst at the Society for Planet and Prosperity, and also a senior research associate at the Center for Climate Change. I would like to bring forward our first speaker, who will be leading us on the topic, the Berlin Health Action Plan and advancing health and climate integration in global negotiation. This particular section will be led by two speakers, Jess and Ellen, both actually ready, and they've been available. And I just read a bit of Jess and Ellen's biography. Jess currently leads the Global Climate and Health Alliance policy work with a focus on UNFCCC process and national climate plan. She works to raise the profile of health as a driver of ambitious climate action at COPs and other UN climate processes. Let me also, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. And other UN climate process are to support the engagement of health community in meetings and written submissions in alignment with the priorities of climate partners. Let me also state that Jess has over a decade of experience in evidence-based policy and programs for public health and environmental determinants, having previously worked with the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change and Non-Communicable Disease Alliance and the International Diabetes Federation. She completed an undergraduate degree in physiological sciences at the University of Oxford and an MSc in health and urban development at the University College London. Let me also quickly bring forth Ellen's brief bio because Ellen will be taking over shortly, immediately after Jess's presentation. So we have to divide this moment 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and see how we balance things up. So Dr. Ellen Connaughton is the head of policy, the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. Recall that Jess was once at the Lancet Countdown. So Helen, MSW MPA joined the Lancet Countdown from the United Nations Development Program, where she was a policy specialist for air pollution and health. Previously, she served as a senior science advisor for the U.S. Department of State Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, and a science advisor at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. She is a fellow in States Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Ellen holds a Doctor of Science in Health Policy from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School, and an MSW from the University of Pennsylvania, and a BA from the George Washington University. She was a National Cancer Institute postdoctoral research fellow at the Joanna Faber Cancer Institute and the Albert T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So with very, very high honor, I will yield the floor to Jess, and then immediately after Jess, Ellen can take over. So if you are able to share your screen, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela, and thank you very much to Get for the invitation today, and really glad to be part of such a stellar panel. A little bit of context as in terms of the backdrop for what we headed into COP30 was the first ever COP in the Amazon. Definitely opportunity to learn from indigenous ways of working with the planet on which we depend. There have been seriously shifting geopolitics in the past few years, not least marked by the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. 2024 was the first year that we at least temporarily surpassed the 1.5 degree limit, the lower bound of what's in the Paris Agreement. And we are very conscious of the fact that we're in a highly challenging international finance landscape, not least when we think about the outcome of COP29 and the fact that developing countries made it incredibly clear that they required 1.3 trillion US dollars to deliver the kind of climate action that was going to be sufficient for their needs. So that includes the protection of human health. But developed countries, rather than providing that level of public finance, instead offered to provide and mobilize 300 billion US dollars, which is about a quarter of the total that's required, but also really lacking in terms of the quality and accountability of that finance, recognizing that mobilizing refers to finance from the private sector and that the private sector isn't accountable under the Paris Agreement, and also that private sector climate finance often drives debt, and the poorest countries in the world are already spending more on debt service than they are on healthcare and education and infrastructure combined, according to Barbados's Bridgetown 3.0 initiative report. So there are understandably questions regarding the effectiveness of multilateralism. It remains the case that the UNFCCC is the only space in which Fiji has a seat at the same table as Canada. There are, of course, really serious power dynamics that underplay how that shape the influence that both of those countries or any developed and developing country have at those tables, but it does remain the only forum that brings all countries together. There have been queries about whether the UNFCCC is delivering what it needs to. The fact is that the Paris Agreement has bent the curve on emissions, albeit not as fast as we would like. And of course, we can't put all of our eggs in the basket of the UNFCCC, but it does remain a unique space and it is driving forward action. There have been proposals for UNFCCC reform relating to issues like whether or not decisions are made based on consensus, or if they could instead be made on the basis of majority voting, and the fact that private sector interests, notably including the fossil fuel industry, but also extending to other polluting industries like agribusiness, all of these can be really deeply harmful for health, as well as contributing massively to emissions. And a lot of those industries do have a really strong hold on the negotiations and a very strong presence. So questions as to whether there are ways to regulate some of that. What did we need from COP30 for health? We know from WHO and from the Lancet Countdown that climate change is a leading threat to the health of people everywhere. It therefore stands to reason that if we're going to protect health in the era that we live in, then ambitious climate decision making and action is absolutely vital for health. A lot of the time, health might be explicit in those decisions, but even if health isn't explicit, ambitious climate decision making will protect health because it will reduce that primary threat to human health. So at COPs, the health community can engage to make sure that health is leveraged to support the kind of ambitious climate outcomes that the wider climate community is calling for, but also that the health gains of those decisions, when they're being implemented at national level, can also be optimized and make sure that we're getting the biggest gains for health that we possibly can from climate action. So with all of that in mind, three things that we really needed from COP30 for health. I'll focus mostly on the first, and I believe Ellen is going to touch on the next two. But we absolutely need accelerated adaptation in health and health determining sectors. The health hazards of climate change are growing as a result of the insufficient mitigation that has been performed. And we need to build more resilient health systems. At the same time, we can't rely only on more resilient health systems, because if we don't also look at resilient agriculture and resilient sanitation, then the burden on those health systems, no matter how resilient we can make them, will eventually be overcome, because there are limits to that adaptation. Also, to make sure that we remain within those limits of adaptation, we do need a just and equitable transition across sectors, including away from fossil fuels. Obviously, that means the global north goes first. It means the global north mitigates furthest and fastest, and also provides finance to the global south. We need finance not only for mitigation, but across all pillars of climate action, mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. But as I said, I'll be focusing mostly on adaptation and then passing over to Ellen for more. So while there isn't a health-specific pillar within the UNFCCC negotiations, there is a health track in the action agenda. And this was track 16 in the COP30 action agenda. And three things that are worth just pinpointing in terms of what came out on health at COP are, of course, the Belém Health Action Plan, which I'll speak a little bit more about in a moment. But that was launched and endorsed by over 30 countries and 50 organizations, and I believe that list is still growing. It's backed by $300 million from the Climate and Health Funders Coalition, including partners like the Wellcome Trust and the Rockefeller Foundation. 300 million is not going to be sufficient to solve all of the action that needs to be taken on climate change to protect human health, but it is nonetheless a noteworthy announcement, absolutely. And then the COP30 special report goes into a lot of the evidence underpinning the actions that are included in the Belém Health Action Plan, and those will be linked in the slides, and happy for those to be circulated. But to go into a little bit more detail on the Belém Health Action Plan, this really builds on the COP28 Declaration on Climate and Health, which recognised a lot of the broad links between climate action and health. But didn't necessarily go into depth into any of them or talk about what was needed to operationalize them. So the Belém Health Action Plan picks up particularly on adaptation. Of course, we need mitigation and loss and damage action in addition to protect human health. But this was a spotlight on adaptation in particular. And there are three action lines in the plan: surveillance and monitoring, evidence-based policies, strategies, and capacity building, and that includes everything from mental health to specific actions needed to protect vulnerable populations, including workers, and actually goes beyond the health sector to look at actions in other health determining sectors. And then finally, the third action line being on innovation, production, and digital health. There are two cross-cutting principles on enhancing health equity and the concept of climate justice, which isn't something that we've seen as much discourse around in terms of links to health. So really glad that the plan has reinforced that interlinkage in the UNFCCC space, as well as leadership and governance on climate and health with social participation. And there's much more detail on all of that in the plan, should you wish to follow the link. But to move from the action agenda to an item on health in the negotiations where there has been a huge focus on health. And all of this to say that we don't need, as the health community, to have a dedicated health negotiating track in the negotiations. We really need health to be the driving force behind all of these other decision-making processes to make sure that we get climate outcomes that are sufficient to protect human health. The history of the global goal on adaptation, I've just realized my slides are in slightly the wrong order, so sorry for switching there. But at COP21, the Paris Agreement was adopted, and this included a reference to the global goal on adaptation. A lot of us are more familiar with the 1.52 degree target, but the fact remains that it's really, while we can track progress towards the 1.52 degree target when we're thinking about how fast is the world heating, how many emissions are we producing, it's pretty easy to decide whether or not we're on track for mitigation. For adaptation, it's much more challenging to track whether or not progress is being made, and that's because the hazards of climate change look so different in different settings, and there are so many different actions that can be taken to remedy those actions to adapt. So by COP26, there was real recognition among governments that there was going to need to be specific work to track whether or not we were meeting this global goal on adaptation, and that was the launch of the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work programme on the global goal on adaptation, which was a 2-year process that culminated in the adoption of a framework called the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience. And that included, thanks in particular to the leadership of the Alliance of Small and Developing States, it was framed around a sort of a well-being narrative. And it includes a dedicated health target, as well as targets for health determining sectors. Some of the other thematic targets, and you'll see the relevance for health are on food, on water, on ecosystems, infrastructure, cultural heritage, and poverty, all of which have implications for health directly or indirectly. Once this framework had been adopted and we had these targets, there needed to be additional work to figure out indicators that we're going to track progress towards these thematic targets. And this was the UAE Belém work programme on the global goal on adaptation. And there were 78 technical experts that were appointed by parties to do this work to understand which indicators already exist at global level, where the gaps might be, and what we could possibly use to track progress on adaptation. Which brings us to the expected outcome, or the hoped outcome for many of COP30, which was the adoption of this set of 100 indicators that had been compiled by experts, including Ellen's colleague, Marina Romanello, so those indicators needed to include health indicators, but it was also really critical that they included good means of implementation indicators, which is finance and technology transfer and capacity building. And while those aren't directly relevant for health, we couldn't possibly hope to see progress on any health indicators unless we've got those means of implementation also being tracked. Notably, it was really important that we didn't track domestic finance or overseas development assistance or private finance, and because these aren't prioritized under the Paris Agreement. In the Paris Agreement, we're looking at the transfer of finance from developed to developing countries. There was a call from least developed countries in advance of COP to triple adaptation finance from a baseline of what should have been delivered by 2025. Which would have given us 120 billion by 2030. That stat is relevant a little bit later in my slides. In terms of how some of the politics unfolded at COP, there was understandably a lot of concern from developing countries about the additional reporting burden on these 100 indicators, especially without finance and other support. And there was also a lot of hesitation based on a comment that had been made by a major multilateral fund on whether or not reporting on these indicators would be a prerequisite for receiving climate finance. There was limited vocal support from developed countries in week one on making sure that these means of implementation indicators were included, which didn't allay the concerns of developing countries. LDCs were quite constructive, that's least developed countries were quite constructive in their proposals for how to come out of Belém with an outcome that was implementable and proposed reappointing some of those experts in a way that parties could continue to consult with them, as well as a process for refining the indicators that weren't quite perfect yet. The AGN preferred to extend the work programme by 2 years to be able to finalise a lot of those indicators that weren't ready to be operationalised yet. And least developed countries' ask on tripling that adaptation finance was supported by AOSIS and by Grupo Sur, but opposed by the European Union and the Environmental Integrity Group because it renegotiated the finance outcome from COP29 in their eyes. We did see some mention of health in the negotiations, including and beyond the strength of the health indicators themselves. So the AGN rightly noted that inadequate finance means that resources have to be redirected from health to other development priorities to make sure that those climate actions can be financed if there isn't the level of finance provided that's needed through UNFCCC related processes. Singapore talked about how progress on the global goal on adaptation is crucial for health as well as for other outcomes. We did hear that the health indicators were of pretty strong quality. And finally, health was also a core theme of the Baku high-level dialogue on adaptation, along with food and water. So what did we land with? And again, the text of the full decision will be in the slides if anyone would like to read it. But the presidency, recognizing a lot of the concerns that countries had on the number of indicators, the reporting burden, and the fact that some of them seem to be more related to loss and damage than to adaptation because of methodological limitations, proposed a new list of 59 indicators just before the end of COP, and I'll talk about that more on my next slide. I'm nearly there. There are challenges with operationalizing this list of indicators. The wording is much more aligned with what a lot of parties wanted to see, but in practice, it's going to be tricky to figure out how we do track progress. There were indicators on heat specifically that ended up being removed, and there's a wider focus, but again, I'll talk about that more in a moment. But really positively, means of implementation indicators are now included in a way that's aligned with the Paris Agreement in the indicators that are being tracked. So that's certainly a win. There is language on the tripling of adaptation finance in the ways that least developed countries had requested, but with modifications, with the timeline being extended, and really notably, there is no baseline. So you need to stick really hard to the fact that we were aiming for 120 billion by 2030. And yeah, not allow any creative interpretations of what that baseline should have been. There's also a 2-year Baku adaptation roadmap that I'll talk about more in a moment. But just to look at these indicators that were adopted and to pick out the fact that there is, in several of them, there's language around mortality associated with climate impacts. And the challenge here is that while heat can be attributed heat impacts can be attributed to climate change, we don't have the scientific methods to be able to attribute infectious disease, as an example at the moment, to climate change itself. We know that they're linked, but it's hard to actually come up with those attribution numbers. And then as another example, there's language on what the health burden is as an outcome of adaptation actions. And it's hard to attribute health impacts to climate change itself. It's even harder to attribute a change in those impacts to the adaptation measures that have been implemented. So the thrust of these indicators is completely understandable, but there will need to be more work on the methods. There is varied language in that global goal and adaptation decision on what the next step should be in terms of methodology. So that will need to be ironed out to figure out how we do actually track that progress. There will be a work program, the Baku adaptation roadmap rather, from 2026 to 2028, with 2 workshops a year. And that will look at things like aligning adaptation action with adequate adaptation responses, strengthening the implementation of the GGA targets, enhancing knowledge sharing, and ensuring access to means of implementation for adaptation. There's a submission deadline for anyone that would like to shape what gets discussed in the Baku adaptation roadmap until 2028. And just to finally reemphasize that for good health, we need indicators both for the health sector and for health determining sectors, but the delivery of means of implementation. And I will stop there. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Jess, for that very insightful presentation. Of course, to as many who followed what happened in Belém, you would understand it was duped the cup of truth and, of course, the global multi-round. I like the fact that you brought up the context. I mean, the fact that that's the first COP in the Amazon, and of course, leveraging on what turns out to be the shifting geopolitics and, of course, the politics of negotiations. I also appreciate the fact that you amplify what is needed, right? The need to accelerate adaptation in health and health determining sector, and of course, increased climate finance. I also, it came to me with nostalgic when you came up with the global goal on adaptation. I remember about two or three peer-reviewed articles that I co-authored were published by the World Resource Institute. I hope you found them. I'm happy to share with you. We also talked about understanding the Paris Agreement global goal on adaptation, and of course, at 2024, we looked at the progress gaps and what to expect in 2034. So some of these must have been highlighted, and then hopefully we make some note out of that. So I'll yield the floor to Ellen. I think Ellen would then spend shorter time to make her presentation. So I would encourage our participants to kindly use the chat if you have any questions or interventions that our panelists can quickly take a look at. Ellen, please take the mic. Thank you. And thank you very much, Jess, for that insightful presentation. Ellen, are you able to unmute?
I'm unmuted now. Thank you. Let me just close that. And thank you, Jess, that you set me up very well and covered a lot of important things. I'm going to briefly discuss the results of adaptation finance at COP, what happened with mitigation and fossil fuel phase out, which is important because, as we all know, if we don't focus on mitigation, we will get to the point where we are unable to adapt to what's happened with climate change. Then briefly talk about nationally determined contributions and the just transition process. So I'll go from there. Sorry, trying to advance my slide. There we go. So on mitigation and fossil fuel phase out, the COP26 pledge to double adaptation finance from the 2019 baseline expires this year. And COP30 was positioned to implement previous COP commitments. I'm sorry, my screen is obscured here.
It's fine for us to hear, Ellen. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. The least developed countries had called for tripling adaptation finance from the 2025 baseline by 2030. And at COP29, countries agreed to the new collective quantified goal to deliver at least 300 billion annually by 2035. And developed countries agreed to take the lead to meet this target. The new collective quantified goal also included a larger target via the Baku to Belém roadmap to reach 1.3 trillion. In Belém last month, parties agreed to scale up finance from all sources to reach the broader target of 1.3 trillion by 2035. This recognized the importance of all sources playing their part and the value of finance systems working together better, including through country platforms. It highlights how governments, finance institutions, and others can finance climate mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. Negotiators agreed to advance actions without discussing recommendations in detail, including actions to reduce debt and to improve incentives for private sector investment in developing nations. They also agreed on a 2-year work program to continue discussions on the Paris Agreement Article 9.1, which discusses the responsibility of developed countries to provide finance for developing nations. And they created a dialogue on Article 2.1c, aligning global financial flows with mitigation and adaptation goals. So I also thought, I'm sorry, I seem to be on the wrong slide. Here we are. That was what I was just talking about. So sorry. Now moving to mitigation. It was expected that COP30 would implement previous COP commitments on phasing out or transitioning away from fossil fuels to keep us on a pathway to 1.5. Unfortunately, despite strong support, the phase out did not pass. The final outcome included no reference to fossil fuels. There was no agreement on binding commitments, and the COP30 presidency is expected to design 2 roadmaps. Separately, Colombia and the Netherlands announced that they will jointly convene the first international conference on the just transition away from fossil fuels, scheduled for April in Santa Marta, Colombia. This conference will establish a broad platform outside of the UNFCCC to map the legal, economic, and social pathways to phase out fossil fuels. There's one important comment here, which is that there's been a lot of discussion both in and outside of COP that 1.5, limiting our warming to 1.5 may no longer be possible. But this is not correct. The science indicates that it is still possible despite being challenging. Turning to nationally determined contributions. By the end of COP, 119 countries had deposited their NDC. This left a quarter that didn't deposit, though a few more have since. This list was missing very big emitters, including Saudi Arabia and India. On the plus side, China did deposit an NDC, which for the first time included a specific emissions reduction target of between 7 and 10%, which is lower than needed, but they said they plan to exceed that target. Of the 3.0 NDCs, there was more inclusion of health content than in the past, which is good. My own observation is that health often wasn't referenced under loss and damage among countries that included a section on loss and damage, and the loss and damage impacts of health are significant. And JESS's organization, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, will be analyzing and scoring NDCs. Also want to note that while many countries have, net zero emissions targets, there was little attention to updating long-term emission strategies. Turning now to the just transition, here there was some positive news. Parties agreed to adopt a process to develop a just transition mechanism. It's the new Belém action mechanism for a global just transition. This is the furthest a COP has gone towards addressing workers' and communities' rights. It commits to a strategy to ensure that a green economy shift is fair for all, including frequently marginalized groups such as women and indigenous peoples. It aims to strengthen international cooperation, to provide technical assistance and capacity building, share knowledge, and support equitable, inclusive transition to low-carbon economies. Negotiators and other stakeholders will share views on a process to develop the mechanism by March of 2026, with a recommended operationalization process to be considered in November 2026. As a corporate approach, the World Economic Forum launched a framework for aligning climate action with positive socioeconomic outcomes. And just a note that though critical minerals and fossil fuels were not specifically referenced, deciding to develop such a mechanism itself does recommend progress. And the Climate Action Network noted that this was one of the strongest rights-based outcomes in the history of the UN climate negotiations. So those are my COP outcomes. If you're not familiar with the Lancet Countdown, I just wanted to share, we've been operating for 9 years. Next year will be our 10th anniversary. We have 6 regional centers in different parts of the world. More than 300 researchers participate in our research collaboration. We focus on over 50 indicators and use produce hundreds of policy documents citing our evidence. And with that, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
That was quite insightful, Ellen, and of course, a very smart and loaded breakdown of what happened in Belém with regards to the NDCs, just transitions, and a whole lot of the items that you rightly have spoken to. And I think if possible, you may want to maybe leave some notes or maybe a link to the Lancet Countdown for people to follow. I have engaged with your platform and they are brilliant. So I know what it means when you have to take a look and then take a stroll into Lancet Countdown pages.
I'll be happy to share my slides and links. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being so magnanimous. I also feel that over time, the decision to actually develop two roadmaps, has been taken to have appeared political. But what happens, whether that's the truth, like the cup of truth, remains about what happens hereafter. I also learned that finance flow to L&D has remained slow and poor because of the returns on investment. But should that be the case? So these are some of the insights and questions we've been gathering. For me, it was also a plus regarding the just transition mechanism, which was also launched. And I think that Nigeria has got on that frontier. I contributed to the waste segment and the Nigerian Just Transition Guideline and Action Plan, which is also at the final stage of publication. And I'm happy to share this with you once they are available. I think we've had a very good start into the webinar, and I hope that our participants are taking note and also taking their questions into the Q&A box to help our panelists to be able to take a look at them and then provide answers before the end of the webinar. Thank you so much, Jess and Ellen, for this insightful presentation. We will now move to our next speaker. And Faith, if you're able to help me project the bio. So we move to our next topic, which is going to be delivered. Our next topic is exacerbating health risk from climate change and building climate resilience health system. I want to know that if Mr. Charles is on the call, he can then please kindly identify or indicate Mr. Charles Wangi if you're on the call. So Faith, please help me. If he's not on the call, I think we move on to the next topic. I hope that, okay. So I would like you to please open your video. I mean, it'd be nice.
Hi, Dr. Charles. Could you please rename yourself so I can identify you? You are using webinar participants, and that's anonymous. So I'm not able to promote you as a co-panelist, as a co-host. Can you rename yourself so I can promote you? Thank you.
Okay, so while we wait for that to be done, I'd just like to say that Mr. Charles will be speaking with us on exacerbating health risks from climate change and building climate resilient health system. This is very important and one of the topic that I will be taking a closer look after the very first topic that we have heard. I mean, I'm taking a look at this because it's not my core, but I think the first topic was also part of my core, and have an understanding, a good grasp of what is happening. Mr. Charles, if you're able to find to resolve these, I'm happy to start with your introduction. Faith, can you let me know if we are able to get on the track?
Yes, he can speak now. Mr. Charles, could you please confirm if you can speak?
All right, thank you so much. I was really struggling with the
Okay.
With technology around here, but at least I can actually be able to speak. I hope you can also be able to see me.
Yes, please give me a minute for your introduction. Dear participants, we thank you for still staying back with us and then for coming to attend the GETS webinar series, the December edition. On our next topic to speak with us is Mr. Charles Wangi, who is the head of program, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, that's PACJA. Mr. Charles is a climate change policy specialist with over 17 years experience engaging at local, national, and international levels, and currently is serving as the head of program and research at PACJA. Previously, he has served in the same organization as a thematic lead on resilient people, society, and economic program, and at the same organization where he coordinated resilient work in 51 countries where PACJA platforms are operational. I like to say that Mr. Charles has served in Sustainable Tropic Alliance STA in an advisory capacity and has been a contributor to low emission rural development discussion in Mexico, Peru, Brazil, USA, and Indonesia for the 2012-2016. Besides climate change issues, he has interest in natural resources conflict resolution. He's trained on reflective mechanism mediation, and he played integral role in development of a conflict resolution course for Wangari Maathai Institute for Peace and Environmental Studies at the University of Nairobi. Mr. Charles Mwangi, Asante Sana. May I honorably yield the floor to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, my brother. And apologies, I could not join you at the very beginning because I had another meeting that really spilled over. So thank you so much for having me in this very, very important conversation. And I'm happy that you considered PACJA as a partner who could come in and, of course, participate and we share our story in this particular platform. Now, I hope you can see my screens. Can you see my screen? Oh, very well. Thank you so very much. Great. So, sorry, just a second. All right, there we are. So I'm supposed to cover this topic on exacerbating health risk from climate change and building climate resilient, health systems. But as I start off, and I'm trying to move my screen, which is not moving. I don't know why my slides are not moving. Oh, good. Very well. Great. So I think I've already been introduced, but just to mention that I work for PACJA, and PACJA is really a continental alliance that brings together over 2,000 civil society actors and networks across now 54 countries in the continent. Of course, our mandate is climate, justice advocacy and raising, the voice of the marginalized communities, of the communities at the front line of climate crisis, and we give this particular voice, prominence, and we're able to raise that in regional and global platforms where decision making happens, to ensure that all the actions, climate actions, are really that are crafted, by, of course, decision makers, really reflect the felt needs of communities at the grassroots of climate crisis. Of course, we came to be in 2008 in Johannesburg, South Africa, when like-minded individuals came together and they thought it's important to think through how we can be able to craft our very own endogenous understanding and interpretation of climate justice, because Africa is a continent that probably experiences the impacts of climate change more than anybody else. And again, therefore, we can only be the right way to define our own, narrative and how we understand and perceive climate justice. Of course, we have many institutions on board, trust, foundations, farmer groups, women groups, and so forth, and so on and so forth. And our advocacy, of course, is multi-layered. We start all the way from the subnational level, national level, regional level, and in global spaces. And I think this information is clear to everyone here that Africa, only contributes to about 4% of total greenhouse gases emissions. And of course, this is not spread evenly across the continent. Probably it's just a few countries that are responsible for the bigger chunk even of these 4%. But again, you also know that more than 34%, actually more than 34 countries in the continent really are listed also as LDCs, because we also have our own vulnerabilities beyond climate change, and therefore climate change becomes a threat multiplier. It exacerbates our poverty, health, and so on and so forth. So we also rely so much on agriculture, remember, and 95% of agriculture is actually rain-fed. And agriculture is a sector that is very, very much sensitive to climate change impacts. But what is important to note is the fact that climate change has so many lenses, and it has now transitioned from just being an environmental issue, but it's an issue that touches on every sphere of our development. And it's no longer a scientific concept. It's a poverty issue in many ways. It's an equity issue. It's a justice issue. And now it's more of a health issue than anything else. And that is why we're here now discussing, the impacts of climate change on health and how then this discourse needs to evolve. But it's so important to note, ladies and gentlemen, that we are actually sitting on a ticking bomb. We are almost reaching the 1.5 degrees, temperature rise. By probably, if we don't reduce our emissions by a whopping 43% by 2030, IPCC is telling us that we might as well actually reach that 1.5, and beyond which we are told the impacts might actually be irreversible. But again, considering this with the 4% that is coming from Africa, that one tells you that even if Africa reduces emissions by 100%, we would still have to require 39% emission cuts by 2030. And therefore, this has to come from the high emitter countries in a big way if we are to keep the 1.5 degrees temperature rise. If we don't have any carbon budget remaining, I don't think so, as it were. And I think it's time now to reduce those emissions. And we were told about the NDCs and how we only have about 19 countries by November who had submitted NDCs, and most of them are not ambitious at all. The only ambitious NDCs are from Africa, yet Africa is where emissions are not necessarily that high. And even now we're headed to a 2.7, 2.8, temperature trajectory. And therefore you need to do much, because these impacts of climate change, at 1.5, they're irreversible, then health impacts will become even more severe. And now coming or delving deeper into now health and climate, you realize that climate change actually presents significant risks really to public health across the continent and beyond, and exacerbating existing vulnerabilities that already exist among our people, and even in some cases introducing some new challenges. And across Africa, health sector and healthcare systems, remember, are already vulnerable. Vulnerable why? Because 630 million of us don't even have access to energy. Whether dirty or clean energy, that energy is not there. And what does that mean in terms of storage of vaccines? What does it mean in terms of conducting operations that are actually needed, and surgeries and so on and so forth? Our systems are already very, very vulnerable. And therefore, when climate change comes and presents other health challenges, we can only strain these systems or health systems that are already, in serious situation. And of course, the health risk linked to climate change in Africa many, of course, including increase in vector-borne diseases, respiratory challenges, and of course, what is also becoming very significant is the mental health challenges that are emanating from the impacts of climate change, and that is significant. And now we also know that most of the challenges we do have, and some of the challenges that we have, especially the gut systems, is basically diarrhea diseases. And most of these diseases come as a result of exposure to, of course, water that is polluted. And why would we consume water that is polluted? Is because of scarcity of the same commodity. And scarcity of that commodity, of course, is a direct impact of climate change. So again, when we talk about air and water temperatures, precipitation patterns, and extreme rainfall events, and seasonal variations, all these again, affect, disease transmission in many different ways. But it's also important to note that as we continue experiencing impacts of climate change, farmers are forced in a big way, because of change of the even ecology of insects and so on and so forth. They are forced to use actually many pesticides, different types of pesticides, and we know the impacts of these pesticides in human basically health and even in animal health. and the aspect of biomagnification, bioaccumulation of these compounds, in human and animal bodies. There are so many, facets through which you can actually look at the climate change impacts on health. But basically summarizing it with this diagram here, you realize that when we have severe weather events, they cause injuries, especially when we have typhoons, cyclones that are affected. For example, Malawi, they have had now more than 7 of them, and of course, that also comes with mental health impacts. I was talking to the former president of Malawi sometimes back, Dr. Joyce Bada, and she was sharing one story of a gentleman who left his house and he went to a washroom just outside the house. Coming back, the whole family had been swept away, by the cyclone, the floods that come with cyclones. And you can imagine the mental health, a challenge that such kind of an occurrence would actually cause in such people. And then, of course, air pollution, of course, will lead to asthma and cardiovascular diseases, change in vector ecology, again, as a result of the changing temperatures, again, has an effect in terms of how malaria spreads, dengue fever, and all those other diseases, chikungunya virus, and so on and so forth. Again, increasing allergens, again, which have got an impact on respiratory systems, by presenting in form of allergies, asthma, and so on and so forth. Water quality impacts, again, think about cholera, think about those other parasites, that comes with poor, water systems or poor water quality. And again, the issues of water and food supply impacts, again, resulting directly to issues of malnutrition, because when we cannot harvest enough, we cannot feed ourselves enough, of course, that presents as malnutrition, which is a health challenge in itself. And again, environmental degradation will, of course, lead to what we call forced migration, conflicts and health impacts of the same. We have been following up also the issues of migration, the effect of climate change on migration, and what we are calling now the climate-induced migration. Again, that comes with a lot of, sometimes physical harm, but again, mental, challenges. And again, brings, of course, cardiovascular challenges, and so on and so forth. Indeed, we have had other interesting, manifestations, the sexually transmitted diseases. And I was talking to one of the health experts who told me that in some of the informal setups where women cannot get access to water, they have to rely on these guys who ride motorbikes to bring water to them. And in exchange, for sexual favors, for example. And that in itself is already also contributing, to a spread of sexually transmitted diseases. An impact that might appear like far-fetched, but indeed all these are really manifestation of this particular challenge, that we are actually looking at. Now, if you look at climate change impacts and mental wellness, because this is a key area that is gaining traction of late, is that we have got some direct impacts. And like I did mention, extreme weather events like floods, drought, and heat waves, actually cause psychological distress. And that has been documented. Trauma, anxiety, depression, particularly among the most vulnerable amongst ourselves. And of course, we also have the indirect impacts, long-term environmental changes like the rising sea levels, desertification. Think about biodiversity loss. Could actually also lead to chronic, stress, uncertainty about the future, and so on and so forth. So all these are really impacts that are actually manifesting in different ways. And of course, like I did mention, there are several groups that are actually vulnerable to this. And of course, the first group, of course, being the youth and the adolescents in this particular regard, and the women also in that particular category, marginalized groups like the pastoralist, fishing communities, and again, also the indigenous communities living in our forest ecosystems. But now, what are some of the efforts probably that have been put in place, to ensure that we are raising the profile of the nexus, climate health nexus, globally and also at the regional level? I want to indicate that mainstreaming health in climate change negotiation is actually a crucial step in addressing this particular challenge. And I want to say from where we sit as Structure, of course, we've been advancing this together with other partners to ensure that health is actually the profile of climate health nexus is really raised, particularly at the decision-making fora, and in this regard within UNFCCC processes like the COP. And if I might point at an example in 2023, in partnership with AMREF, AFIDEP, Africa Group of Negotiators, and others, we were able to actually develop the first Africa common position on climate and health. And this we did in Malawi. And that tool was very, very useful in really pushing for raising the profile of climate health nexus in the COP negotiations. And indeed, if you look at what happened, in COP28 again, health really was a critical agenda. And this topic has not necessarily been given prominence before. But again, that became an important conversation, so that we have a declaration on climate and health, that came from COP28. But again, at COP29, we were able to launch what we're calling Pan-African Partnership on Climate and Health, really bringing together players in that particular sector, and to really advance this discourse on climate change. We've done quite a number of meetings, including bringing together the ministers of environment and ministers of finance, of health, finance and health, and also environment, trying to bring that particular nexus and really connect the three ministries, because they have to speak to each other so that we're able to mainstream health within the environmental sector, but again ensure that financing is available to deliver that. Now, in the last Africa Climate Summit that was hosted by Ethiopia, we had a health cluster among other 16 clusters for non-state actors, and we had about 69 prayers within that particular space. And we generated what we are calling now the non-state actors common position, again on health, which was actually submitted to the organizers of the summit. And we are glad that our footprint is seen in the Addis Ababa Declaration. So these are some of the little ways that we have been raising this nexus at COP30, at COP30, sorry, in Belém again. We had quite a number of engagements and even side events again, really trying to raise the profile of climate and health. And now we have what we call the Belém, Health Action Plan. So we thought, or we are thinking that probably we are making some headways in terms of making sure that stakeholders understand why we really need to raise the profile of health. And the presenter who presented before me, of course, indicated that even within the 59 indicators for GGA, we still have some indicators on health. Of course, we may not be where we want to be, but at least that is actually showing up in some of these important policy documents. So therefore, what do we need to do as I finish? There are several things. Well, we need to do more of policy advocacy. We need to advocate for inclusion of health in national climate policies, including the national adaptation, plans and transition plans. Again, we need to ensure that our health systems are actually resilient. And here we have some two-pronged approaches here. One, we can strengthen climate-sensitive disease surveillance systems, and we promote partnerships for tackling energy poverty in healthcare delivery, because, like I said, energy is a key component, of resilient health systems. Again, we need to mainstream focus on vulnerable groups. So we need to conduct vulnerability assessment to guide targeted health interventions and incorporate, again, indigenous knowledge in some of these adaptation strategies. But again, like I did mention, mental health need to be singled out as an important area to consider. So we need to develop toolkits for mental health support in climate-affected communities, particularly those are affected by drought and those are affected by cyclones and floods. But again, global engagements, we need to strengthen regional coalitions to amplify Africa voices in negotiations, but also improve health data and correction for evidence-based policy making. And again, policy frameworks, we need to ensure human rights and equity are also central in climate health policy frameworks. And then the call to action here is that we need recognition and support in acknowledging health impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations especially, and providing appropriate support and resources. But again, like I did mention, we need inclusive policies that address both climate resilience and health, ensuring that health services, including mental health, are accessible to all. Psychosocial support is needed, and I think I want to stop there because of time. I think I've run over my time. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Mr. Charles Wangi, for very, very inclusive presentation around exacerbating climate issues. I like the fact that you spotted climate change as a universal concern. It is an economic issue. It is a health issue. It is an education issue. It is beyond science as it is because it affects everything that blooms around us. And I like the fact that you also touched base on the NDC, amplifying the fact that most NDCs from that has been submitted, the ones from Africa, remains most ambitious. And that also takes me back to one of our work around the NDC landscape in Africa, where we actually spotlighted the NDCs from Malawi, Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And to say that most of the highest polluting nations are yet to even submit their NDC is concerning. And I think we should be watching out for what these promises to bring forth. And I want to rely on the key recommendation and very, very spot on action plan. Let me say thank you once again for that very brilliant presentation. And I want to encourage our participants that you kindly use the Q&A box to help and let our panelists also take a look at what concerns, what interventions, and what questions that you have so that they can attend to it very, very swiftly. We're running out of time, and I'd like to quickly bring up our next panelist who is going to lead us on this topic, promoting promoting the One Health approach and multi-sectoral collaboration to strengthen health system in response to climate change. And I'll just quickly read about, so get onto the bio, and then we move on. I'd like to make a request, very, very simple request ahead that you can wrap up this in 15 minutes, and then we have some little time to take on Q&A to those who would like to raise their hands and speak. I would also encourage our panelists to kindly please take a look at the Q&A box. If you find any question, let me know, and then I can give the floor to you. Our speaker, Dr. Ashita Humesh, co-focal point, Resource Mobilization Team, Children and Youth Pavilion, and also founder of Vada Hope Foundation, is a dedicated and multifaceted professional, and she's deeply committed to advancing healthcare and driving social change. Her remarkable journey is adorned with accolades that mirrors her unwavering dedication. In 2016, she was featured in an Olympics promo video, igniting her passion for making a difference. And she was honored by the former Education Minister of Karnataka for her outstanding community work and received the prestigious She Diva title. This is to celebrate our speakers, and I thought that we will not be stingy with our applause. Please, let's give it to all our panelists, even as I introduce Dr. Hashita. She has an active involvement with the UN organizations, publications, internship, mentorship, and continuous learning underline her commitment to holistic growth. Dr. Ashita Humesh envisioned a future where her contribution empower individuals to embrace innovative healthcare solutions and social initiatives for societal betterment. But today, Dr. Ashita is empowering nations because we have people joining from different parts of the world. With a very high honor, I yield the floor to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this invitation from Get Africa. And hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Harshita. I just graduated my bachelor's in medicine, and I will be starting my residency in surgery from Monday. So I'm super excited to be here. Um, I was asked to finish this presentation super fast, so I will try to do the best I can without rapping through the entire thing. But you've already heard from all the amazing and wonderful speakers beforehand about how health is being integrated across different policies, across societies, across how everyone wants to really alive, rather protect our. And as a frontline healthcare worker, someone who's worked in a government hospital in India, I feel like it's more and more important for us to understand what this means. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
You have the next slide. Okay.
What we see every single day when we talk about climate change, one slide behind. Right. So what we see when we talk about climate change and how does this impact health on the ground every single day is that we see climate change affecting human health and thereby society. How many of you remember COVID? Like just hands up. Come on, let's make this interactive. We're almost at the very end of today. And I want you to take back something that helps you create this kind of action and advocacy on the ground. So you guys do remember COVID, right? But here's the thing, COVID was already predicted to happen because there had been like changes in different influenza viruses. And that comes in because it actually mutated from animals. So threats to animal health and populations, including ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss, which is now releasing unknown and new pathogens into our systems, including like food systems and vulnerabilities. Like how many people over here eat meat? I'm not gonna go vegan on you, but just out of curiosity, how many people eat meat? I don't. It's a kind of a cultural thing for me, but okay, so we do have people eating meat, but the issue with people also eating meat right now is that it's so they're adding in extra hormones, they're adding in all of these antibiotics, and that's increasing antimicrobial resistance as well. And that actually cascades across sectors and communities because everybody needs food to survive, right? But what this means is that this disparity is not even. This disparity is more for poor or socioeconomic strata people rather than it is for someone who's able to afford good health and well-being. Next slide, please. And that's why we're having this particular conversation today. We're talking about how this heat stress impacts vulnerable populations significantly. For example, people working on the streets every single day, like vendors, people selling fruits and vegetables if you're living in an agrarian economy, then farmers. If and all these people are those who have to work on the streets every single day, whether they like it or not, because if they don't, then they don't have money. And if they don't have money, that means they don't have a roof above their heads and food on the table. How many of you have very recently heard about Delhi's air quality level or even Pakistan's? No? Okay, so there has been someone who's heard about it, but then you would know, right, that it's so hazardous that you can't even see in front of you. The haze is so bad. They're shutting down schools. That's going to obviously impact people's education. And that is assuming this person is completely healthy. They don't have any underlying chronic illnesses or they have any, lung conditions, so on and so forth. What do you do if someone like me who has asthma is living in the capital? I might be able to relocate for a couple of, weeks or months. And actually, fun fact, Delhi did say that, oh, you guys, if you have the opportunity to relocate, then we would say, go on a vacation, relocate, don't live in the capital. And that's extremely problematic. But what about like malnutrition rates are increasing because of erratic weather patterns disrupting food production and security, and zoonotic diseases that we're seeing change globally because vectors are changing. Places which have never had malaria and dengue are now having malaria and dengue. And some of us that live in the tropics, we already have resistance. For example, people living in sub-Saharan Africa actually have the sickle cell trait that prevents the malaria parasite from attacking their cells, but that's not the same for a lot of people living in Europe, which makes the disease that much more deadly. Next slide, please. So why are we talking about One Health as a way of looking at this multi-sectoral approach? Because One Health is actually like three different health that we talk about together holistically as One Health, which is the integration of animal, human, and environmental health. And having shared governance of protecting one or the other means you're protecting the other thereby. And this should be the core principle that drives prevention and collaboration because it encourages proactive measures across integrated health sectors and helps us create like the shared data bank that helps us make more informed decision making, thereby enhancing our responses through the collection and analysis of this data. Next slide, please. So this is how it would look like, right? When we talk about public health, global health, One Health, and then planetary health. So you have human health, which would look at like the social determinants of health, the way that populations move. When we talk about the environment, we talk about air pollution, water pollution, deforestation, changing of our ecosystems, the biodiversity. When we talk about animals, we talk about livestock and then antibiotics and disease vectors. And you see how it's more encompassing, right? But when you include it to say, hey, I want to think about this in terms of everything that's on the planet and the planet itself, because we have already crossed one of our planetary tipping points, you then realize that we cannot have, health or well-being without talking about health and well-being of, health and well-being of humans, without talking about health and well-being of the planet, of animals, and the environment as well. Does anyone know which was the recent planetary tipping point that we have just crossed? No? Okay, I
Yeah.
will rush through. Okay, no, please tell me.
Oh, please go ahead. I'm so sorry,
Okay.
man. Yeah.
No worries. Actually, one of the oceans, the coral reefs that we have continue are being bleached right now. And we do have like a lot of plankton that are dying. And that means we're going to have a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that's one of the major tipping points that we're not going to be able to move back from or correct. And this was something that had been predicted. And it's alarming to see this happen in real time in our lives right now. Next slide, please. So yeah, so what do you think is the best way to go ahead? So I've given you three different healthcare system health systems approaches. One is about the planetary health, which focuses more heavily on social and political aspects of human health, natural resources, environmental science. Eco health focuses a lot more on ecosystems and resources and equity, and how are you going to manage that? Whereas One Health is more something that's scientific with a multidisciplinary approach that's about human, veterinary medicine, and the environment put together. So there are different schools of thought that say that, hey, planetary health is better. Some people say One Health is better. Some people say eco health is better. I guess it depends on what kind of a conversation that you want to put forward and how you're really advocating for each of them. Because some people prefer using the One Health approach when they talk about antimicrobial resistance and vaccines. And then there are people who like to talk about eco health when they're talking about health in terms of biodiversity loss and indigenous and traditional medicine. And then I've heard a lot of climate change advocates talk about planetary health approaches. Next slide, please. So, what are the climate sensitive risks and why are we talking so deeply about all of these systems? Is because habitat destruction raises the likelihood of zoonotic disease outbreaks. And oftentimes, where you have these are at the borders of like your forests or your glaciers or all of those things. Heat-driven vectors, for example, all of these tropical diseases, including neglected tropical diseases carried by vectors, are moving further north or further south and away from the equator. Waterborne diseases are a lot more common when there's a lot of heat stress because there's a lot of contamination that also happens. But this is also happening with the flooding. So, for example, recently, the massive flooding that happened in Indonesia has contaminated the groundwater supplies. Ministerial mandates, because now we're saying that, hey, it's not just the Ministry of Health or family welfare or well-being, whatever it's called in your countries, that's responsible, but each and every single ministry that's linked to health, including say gender, could come in and talk about sexual and reproductive health rights. You could have your agricultural ministry coming in and talking about agroecology, nutritional security, food security, your water minister talking about water security and making sure that water pollution is not happening, and collaborative action, because like it's always better to have a more coordinated response for more effective what would I use the word, effective measures across these sectors. Next slide, please. So this is how the infectious disease is changing. As you can see, from wildlife, it's moving differently. From non-wildlife, it's moving differently. Vector-borne diseases are again moving a lot further away from the equators, and populations and healthcare systems, including healthcare workers, are not prepared to tackle that or to handle that, including drug resistance that's also spreading really rampantly. as well. Next slide, please. This shows how, the flowchart really moves, like how population and social cultural organizations actually integrate with the ecosystem itself. So you have these habitats that move down, and that's how like the diseases emerge. But since we don't have a lot of time, maybe I can share the slide deck later and you can go through this in more detail. Next slide, please. This is again something similar about how this is a very dynamic process and how the physical environment and the social cultural environment actually affects people's health status and well-being. Because oftentimes, especially in global majority countries, health communication is extremely hard and help seeking behavior is even more different. So these risks and perceptions and behavior actually change how people react to new information coming in. So here, all of us, we've had access to all of these resources. Yes, I can definitely share the presentation later. So we can definitely, so back to the slide. Um, when you're talking to people on the ground, it's very difficult to tell them, hey, don't take antibiotics without being prescribed by a doctor, because they're just like, hey, you're going to prescribe the same thing to me. And to them, it doesn't seem like it's something truly different. But otherwise, it's a lot more complicated because all of this comes into how are you also protecting your health and well-being. For example, open defecation problems, and especially in humanitarian and protracted crisis situations where you don't really have access to wash. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of One Health? Ecology, right? We can talk about the altered disease patterns. We can actually predict all of these increased pathogen emerge, the enhanced zoonotic, risks, including the pandemic preparedness tree that, World Health Organization is talking about, and antimicrobial resistance. But also in the climate change space, we can talk about early warning systems. We can talk about climate sensitive monitoring of these diseases, and can healthcare systems then become resilient to it? It means proactive data sharing across multiple sectors, meaning you would have integrated response strategies. Next slide, please. So what are the health challenges? Like, this sounds really great. So if this sounds really great and we've had this being spoken about for decades at this point, why aren't we moving forward? It's because you have a lot of hazards that keep striking, especially. So healthcare systems and including healthcare workers have had to deal with these uh, climate shocks, I would say, and these exposures. And we've not had enough time to actually adapt what is the best available science, at least not in the global majority countries. But in the global north, that actually gives us a lot of a chance to actually adapt to future threats, because you're seeing what's already happening in the front lines. And that means figuring out, heat-related illnesses, mental health, undernutrition, including what is right now the largest displacement, migration, and conflicts the world has seen. Next slide, please. So the current gap is often emphasizing clinical care and short-term emergencies because that's all we have capacity for. And as a frontline worker who's worked in a lot of these situations, I would say we're constantly triaging, which means we're choosing, okay, who can we save over who can we not save, trying to maximize the resources we have available to ensure that maximal people can actually receive healthcare and support. But that's not how it's supposed to be, because what we're supposed to have, which is like moving towards universal health coverage in 2030, is that we need everyone to be able to access healthcare. Everyone should have access to a good quality of life and well-being. The big health threat is climate, right? Increasing vulnerability and health inequities across populations. Next slide, please. So these are the current barriers to health system adaptation to climate change, including low climate risk perception, inequity and poverty, healthcare deliveries not reaching the last mile, lack of specific climate and health policy, which is like now actually changing with the new NDCs and the NAPs that have come out, including in the biodiversity COP, which actually has more ambitious health in their thing. Lack of funding and resources, because a lot of times it's still focused on research and not on advocacy and ensuring that you have these programs at the last mile. Very poor disaster preparedness, poor policy implementation and evaluation, even if we have that, and a lot of infrastructural constraints. Next slide, please. But that's why it's so important for us to collaborate, right? Because if we do, then we're able to address these complex challenges. And by fostering these partnerships across these sectors, we can develop integrated solutions that improve health outcomes and build resilient systems capable of withstanding future threats. Next slide, please. So what are these challenges and what do we see moving forward on where we can tackle it? Fragmentation, first of all, a lot of fragmented mandates, and this is why it's so important for all of us to push for more ambition and also to hold our governments and our policymakers, but also civil society organizations accountable so that it doesn't lead to confusion. We don't have people, duplicating efforts, but rather building on a consolidated effort that can reach more people. Data, which is still incompatible, like a lot of indicators that we're using are not very friendly, and there needs to be a more effective way of communication and coordination. One of the best examples of this would be the early warning systems itself. A lot of them are not in regional languages. A lot of them are not able to be understood by the poorest of the poor society, by people working on the front lines, on the fields, and a lot of them thus get impacted, leading to a lot of morbidity and mortality. So figuring out how can we move forward and change that to be something that's more friendly to the user. Budgeting, as everyone has seen this year, has been horrible in terms of finance, but separate budgets, including, say, microfinancing at the lowest levels, would ensure that healthcare delivery reaches the last miles, including collaborative funding. But this also means that you should have people with lived experience, people who have not been included in these cycles before being integrated into this, so that it's not just the same people working on this, but rather the communities being empowered and built and being capacity built to deal with future issues. Planning, because misaligned planning cycles result in missed opportunities for integrated health interventions. Next slide, please. One Health governance and measurement, and I'll run through this super quick within like 2 minutes. Next slide, please. So while I was looking into this, I saw that there was a lot of interministerial coordination, joint risk assessments, and shared indicators. And one of those indicators, next slide, please, is the Global One Health Index. So this is not something that's formally recognized by the UN, but this was something I found interesting so people can read up more about this. It's basically something that was evaluating national capacity. So this was like a large study that was actually done. And it talked about health, environmental, and climate change to promote integrated solutions. So you see that they put up this kind of picture on the side where they talked about what are the intrinsic drivers and how is that going to be included in the Global One Health Index? What are the external drivers that we don't have a lot of, for example, the socioeconomic cultural factors affecting the One Health development, including the Earth system, technology, sociological things, and what are the core drivers that are actually working in the midst of One Health? And those would be that, the human environment and animal health, so such as zoonotic infectious diseases, food security, AMR, climate change, and governance. Next slide, please. So these indicators would then help us measure climate exposure and health outcomes, but would also help us in evaluating mitigation and adaptation capacities, because globally you see a lot of businesses saying, hey, maybe it's better for me to adapt rather than mitigate, but it's important for us to start mitigating because, as a speaker previously mentioned, we don't have a lot of carbon budget left. Next slide, please. So how would this really complement, the climate indices? Like you already have a health-centric approach and you have an integrated framework. So all you need is to have enhanced policy coherence. Next slide, please. So how would this all be integrated into national plans? I know all the speakers have already spoken about this before, so we're going to run through this in, again, 2 minutes. Next slide, please. For health systems, it's about identifying what are the climate-sensitive health gaps in systems and targeting resource allocation, and then prioritizing investments to build resilience. Next slide, please. So in the national adaptation plans, which is in the climate space itself, it's about like risk assessments, it's about looking at animal health, climate resilient systems, and ecosystem actions. And this means, as a lot of speakers have spoken previously, so I'm not going to get into this, but it's about looking at different negotiation tracks and ensuring that the NAPs actually cross-cut everything. Next slide, please. One Health in national determined contributions include prioritizing health alongside climate adaptation, infrastructure improvements, enhanced surveillance, and coherence across sectors and policies. Next slide, please. And in terms of biodiversity, it's about integrating ecosystem services for health and resilience, disease regulation through biodiversity preservation, promoting biodiversity gains for sustainable development, enhancing climate resilience in ecosystems and communities, and leveraging One Health for policy integration. But one other super important thing that's actually starting to be spoken about right now is the integration of traditional and indigenous knowledge systems, as well with allopathic medicine that's being practiced right now. Next slide, please. We're almost at the end. So what is
Okay.
we're almost at the end, I swear. So what does this look like if it's a practical implementation and success? Next slide, please. It looks like increased coordination. It looks like having specific indicators to measure the success. It looks like alignment and similar language across sectors. And it also includes pilot projects that actually test this approach and demonstrate that successful integration. Next slide, please. So these success factors would then be universal health coverage, reduced spillover risk, very strong early warning systems that actually prioritize people, and resilient health systems. Next slide, please. So this will be what a resilient healthcare system looks like. Because we don't have time, I'm just going to say next slide, please. But if you'd like to take like a photo, maybe we can wait for 10 seconds. So what would be the key messages and call to action since we're wrapping up? Next slide, please. It would be that this represents a very critical challenge requiring innovative approaches. It means multi-sectoral collaboration has more comprehensive solutions, and focus needs to be shifted towards prevention rather than to response, which is what healthcare systems are doing right now. And it means accurate measurements of health capacities for informed climate action strategies. Next slide, please. So governance, and this is what's super important in the COP30, is about fostering interministerial collaboration and establishing robust metrics, but also means accountability and regular monitoring and evaluation. Next slide, please. So thank you. I have a very funny meme for you over here about how nature is healing, but I'm sorry that I had to rush through this presentation, but I still hope you found it meaningful and you learned something out of it.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Hashita, for these very eye-opening and quite insightful presentation regarding One Health. Having followed Get Consortium some years back, I have had an insight into what One Health is all about. But your presentation has further ignited the need to really want to understand more. Thank you so much for that presentation. Dear participants, I want to say that our time is fast spent. There are so much to unpack in a very short time, and I think Get will oblige us a part two to bring our panelists and then and reiterate what has been said today. I'll go quickly. I really have. I took a lot of notes, Dr. Ashita, and I like the call to action messages that you put up in the end. And more importantly, that photo, the crocs are now returning to the rivers. In what form are they returning? Whether in live form or in a form that will continue to affect us. I want to believe that our participants have listened and have also been able to take a lot of things away. So I checked on the Q&A box and I found, okay, I see that Dr. Ashita is typing, and I hope that will attend to one of the questions being asked. I saw one question by Hukamaka or Kafor. I don't know if any of our panelists would like to take that up in 30 seconds. If you're able to take that, yeah, but if not, I want to think that the community pharmacists, so our communities are washed by yeah, okay. So Dr. Shita is asking to Kamaka Oka for email or connect, so can respond better to that. Unfortunately, before you leave, Dr. Ashita, can I ask all our panelists to please show their video Faith, if you are able to take a group photograph at this point before she leaves, and we can have this for keep. If that is possible, Dr. Dutton, are you able to, can you stop spotlighting me, and then we can get as many people who would like to get on this group photo. Okay, if you can spotlight the panelist and Doctor. Is Jess still on the call? Oh no. Jess, are you there?
Jess unfortunately
Okay.
had to leave. She had like another conflicting commitment.
Oh, okay. So can we have I mean, I think we can have these and have it for keep. Maybe later somebody should Photoshop Jess photo into this. Okay, Faith, are you done? Faith, if you confirm to me that you're done. Oh, okay, I see thumbs up from the Get handle. So thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. And I like that you already made a request for the questions. And I think our community has been proliferated with a whole lot of pharmacists, whether confirmed or professionals or not, and then they turn out all sorts of dosages of drugs, and this end up affecting health of people. I think it's something that has to be looked into. We have those who are even the informal sector, those who are non-learned, carrying on their heads, I mean, all sorts of dosages, brands of drugs, only to see that they're taking care of people's health. I think that has to stop if we must engage and ensure that One Health delivers all of its good success stories. If there are questions that you have to take up on that, I think. Oh, okay. There's no longer info around that. So once again, I'd like to say thank you for coming. For me, the key takeaway is the fact that there is need for collaboration. Whether you are on the climate side, whether you're on the science side, whether you're on the civil society side, whether you're on the coordination side, whether you work on the private sector side, there is need. I see collaboration in all of the things that we've seen here. And I also feel that there's need to also increase the capacity gap for key actors who still do not understand the nuances around these topics. Many people still don't understand how the COP process works, especially on the negotiations, and see how they can actually make meaningful impact. How then do we bring the message of COP's negotiation into key stakeholders, key actors, to the practitioners, so that they know how to also get involved? How then can we ensure that from Africa, the climate vulnerable countries also don't become reactive to some of the solutions that are being put together or being put up by the developed countries? How do we also ensure that the developed countries or the highest polluters also make a lot of commitment into providing solutions to the exacerbating effect and challenges of climate change that is even exacerbating further our health situations? So these for me are key takeaways, and I want to believe that this will reflect in the communique that GET will be presenting after this webinar. I don't know if there are any announcements at that. I want to sincerely appreciate on behalf of GET, and I think this webinar has been put together in collaboration with Harley and Walls. And here we are today sitting down, and I want to say appreciation to all our panelists who have also promised to share the presentation slides with us so that we can share with all the participants. Once again, I'm not getting any feedback if there are announcements, and if those announcements are available in the chat box, okay. I think we can take the announcement that has been put in the chat box as the announcement and key takeaways from today. I just want to maybe have a request from our participant to please let us use any of the emoji that comes your way to appreciate our panelists and at the same time get for putting together this very important conversation. I have received several notes from my friends, and they really want to take this discussion further after today. I would like to also be in touch with all of our panelists and see how we can expand the frontiers of this advocacy and then get to those who really need to know about them to move the needle, at least, so that people can then begin to see action. Once again, I thank Get Consortium for inviting me to moderate this session. It's December, my birth month, my wife's birth month, and our wedding anniversary. And I want to say to my wife, thank you for allowing me to come and moderate this session today as we go back to our felicitations. So once again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Get Consortium. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Ashita, and congratulations on your new endeavor, Dr. Ashita. It's not a very small milestone, but a huge one. And I look forward to celebrating all of you. Once again, please, if you have any information, please follow Get Consortium on all of the social media handles and reach out back to us. I'm available on LinkedIn. Some of you, please look out for my name on LinkedIn. Let's connect and we can take this conversation further. For me, I am much interested in this. And one of my colleagues is handling, is drawing up a paper on health resilience and in connection with climate change. And then I'll yield the floor back to Dr. Dotun for the closing remarks. Thank you once again. Asante sana.
Thank you, Boyega,
Dr. Dotun.
Thank you, Boyega, for that very wonderful coordination of today's webinar. And I want to start by thanking all our presenters for the presentations have been wonderful, and I've learned so much from today's presentations. It's like we're saving the best for the last, and we're having the one of the best webinars in the last month of the year. Yeah, all I want to say is that this is the last webinar for the year 2025, and I want to thank all our participants and our speakers from January to December. You are the reason why we do this every month, and we appreciate your efforts. We appreciate your time, your talents, and your expertise that you decided to share with us on this platform. Thank you very much, everybody. I wish you a very fantastic Christmas and Happy New Year. By God's grace, we'll meet on this platform again in 2026. And like Boyega said, the key word there is collaboration. Let's continue to work together. The challenges we're facing in our world today, they are complex, and there's no single organization, no single experts can individually handle these complex interwoven challenges. And that is why collaboration, working together transitionally, has become the order of the day to address issues and challenges facing us globally, nationally, and regionally. So, as an organization, Global Emerging Pathogen Treatment Consortium gets, we look forward to working with as many experts, as many organizations as possible to address emerging challenges facing us in the world, especially in Africa. We look forward to continuous collaboration and continuous working together with these organizations. Thank you very much for your support in 2025, and we look forward to bigger collaboration and support in the year 2026. Have a fantastic Christmas and Happy New Year in advance. See you in 2026 by God's grace. Cheers to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Cheers.